Am I on? Thank you, Len, for the confirmation. Welcome, everyone, to the routine BA in Tech session, which stands for Business and Human Rights in Tech, and we call it in short BiT. So, on the sessions where we don't have a panel or a guest speaker, we would have topics like this to discuss the idea behind our data-centric digital rights advocacy. And the topic for today's discussion is one of the pillars of our data-centric digital rights, which is the concept of I am my. So we shall start the conversation. I shall start with introducing myself. My name is Mariam Lee. I work as the BHR in Tech officer at the I Foundation. The I Foundation has been in the BHR in Tech work since 2019. So we've been doing this for almost 3 years now, finding out ways to implement the United Nations Guiding Principle of Business and Human Rights, specifically for the tech sector. So what do we mean by data-centric digital rights? Essentially, it is a variation from the traditional digital rights advocacy where human rights is being applied onto the online or digital space. As for data-centric digital rights, essentially we're putting we are putting forward the argument that our data entity is attached to us as the source entity, and therefore protecting human rights in the digital space means protecting that data entity from any kind of harm that may come to their way. Because if our data entity is harmed in the digital space, it would then affect us, the source entity, in the physical space. So today we are discussing one of the pillars of data-centric digital rights. The first pillar is I am my data. The second pillar is rights by design. And the third pillar, hold on. Sometimes I forget the words to my own principles. So I have to refer to my notes. So third pillar is end remedy. Yeah. So, okay. Before we go into why this is the case, I would like to actually invite some of the technical people we have at the I Foundation. Isaac, you are already on stage. I would like to invite Jean to also come to the stage to give us an overview of why we think there should be a connection between. Hello, welcome, John. So, tell us why this why are we making this argument that data itself that is the thing that needed to be protected in order to protect our human rights?
Hi, Mariam. Hi, everyone. Yeah, thanks for the question and for inviting me to the stage. So the reason why we decided to look into these principles was essentially it was answering the question: if you want to have a little bit of a change or a big change, in fact, of paradigm in the way programmers are going to be looking at the code and to the architectures that they design, what would be the immediate type of easy concepts that they could anchor themselves into all the decisions. So you don't want to get into very complex principles. You don't want to get into very complex ideas. You want something that is going to be very easy to grasp, very easy to remember, and that will become sort of second nature or even first nature when you are designing software. And so everyone is putting principles left and right. And there's just too many principles to follow. So we wanted to really concentrate on having the smallest amount as possible, and to be representative as possible of those changes of paradigm, and for them to act a little bit like that. Was it Gemini Cricket, the one from Pinocchio, the voice of your consciousness that is always telling you, pay attention to this, pay attention to that. The first one, which is the one that we are discussing today, being I am my data. It's pretty much the attempt for automatically understanding that the data that is representing us is us. And it's not so difficult to imagine why would that be the case. All the data that is being extracted from our interactions online, whether it's in the internet or any other digital space, you will always have it generating this profiling of you. And the profiling is going to be on a number of areas. So first one, the obvious one is the physical one, as in your appearance, your height, your weight, the color of your hair, and so forth. But then comes as well everything that has to do with where do you go and where you interact, the locations where you go, the people you interact with, the type of food that you consume, of which you generally write reviews and so forth, but also the information that has to do with the black box of your head. What is your type of personality? What are the kind of things that you like? What are the kind of things that you don't like? What are the emotional buttons that need to be pressed in order to entice a specific reaction towards you consuming a product or towards you supporting a specific political party, or the other way around, antagonizing you against specific decisions. All of that essentially models you. And so the way we put it when we think about the principle of I am my data is to think it from the perspective of treat their data as the way you would like to be treated. If you start looking at that, it becomes very apparent that making sure that people's data is properly protected is not only on their benefit, but also on yours. And there's a number of interesting consequences when you start looking into the fact that the data is an extension of us. It's the fact that we have this hypothesis in the AI Foundation that we still haven't been able to develop properly, but we want to go down that road and see if there's anything there to be explored, which is whether the fact that we would assume and accept and recognize, legally speaking, that the data is an extension of ours, then maybe at that point constitutional laws that apply to most of us, and most places in the world have democratic governments that work with the constitution, some type of constitutional law. Those laws probably would protect your data automatically for being an extension of yourself. And so it comes into question as to whether data protection laws will be necessary at that point or not, or there will be an extension of that constitutional law, or possibly that we will have to look at them from the importance as to how critical they are just as constitutional law, considering that they are referring to an element that is an absolute, how to say this? It is something that cannot be detached from you. The moment that you start interacting with digital technologies, you can't detach yourself from your data. And data needs to be fully contextualized in order to do that, because otherwise it has no value. And that contextualization is what creates the link between you and your data. And so the I am my data principle ended up being the number one, because it is the first fundamental assumption to start working out if you want to move into the next ones.
Yeah, thank you very much, John. This is another argument on top of the many arguments that are already out there of how valuable our data is, especially our personal data, the food that we like, the brands that we shop at, like who we would vote for, or any other type of like behavior patterns, which are sold at very high prices to advertisers or advertising companies in order to get as many eyeballs as possible um, to their products or to their services. It should be highlighted that the collection of information is not really the thing that's the problem here. I mean, collecting information is fine and is necessary, but collecting information that is not even necessary for business processes or for that particular business transaction to occur, that is the one that is what problematizing today. With so, and then there's also the fact that with so many of these business and services collecting our data, uh, we don't even know maybe where do we begin to protect those entities of ours that are representing us in the digital realm, making transactions on behalf of us. So this is how do you say this buying and selling, this behavior to buy and sell is normal. It is the nature of the marketplace. But the buying and selling that is not based on our consent or um, based on what we don't based on something that is ours, which is our data, that we see, it seems like we have access to, it seems like we have the ultimate control over our data, but at the end of the day, the actual control of that data belongs to the whoever owns the platform, whoever owns the company. And then it's easy to say that if we don't like that service, if we don't like our data to be extracted or to be collected, then don't use any kind of services or platforms that collect your data. But then it's not as simple as that, because most of the time we don't actually have that kind of choice. I mean, even traditionally, if you try to go to the bank trying to take out a loan, if you're not willing to share your financial history, you're not very likely to get your loan approved. So it is necessary for us to have records to verify the information that we have at hand. I mean, it is logical to safeguard our assets. Um, but as users of digital services, uh, even though we do realize we have the ultimate control uh, over our personal data, but in reality, most of the time we are actually forced to reveal more than we actually want, to reveal more than we actually need to reveal. So, so that's the progression of the thought of the thinking behind IRMA data. If you look at your data as something that represents you in the digital space, you would want to protect the rights of the data to not be copied to someone you don't approve of, or to not be sent over to a platform where you don't want to be there. And also, what kind of data, what kind of parts, what kind of digital parts that you don't, you may be okay to share with A, but you may not be okay to share with B. For example, maybe in a smart city program, I am okay to share my data with the city council in order for the city council to come up with policies that would actually benefit the masses or the people of who live in the city. But I won't be okay, for example, to take to share my data with a private or commercial entity for the purposes of advertising. So that kind of control is the one that we are missing today. And we come back to the question of so what, right? Like, I am my data, so what now and then what? This is where we should be thinking about alternative ways to sharing data. I mean, we already accept the fact that we have to share data, yes, but what kind of sharing are we doing? What kind of sharing are we talking about? is there a way to actually provide companies or services the data that they need without actually revealing the data itself, for example? So to prove that something is true without revealing the thing that we are proving is it's one of the applications that could be more promoted uh, as a way to protect that data, that protect people's privacy online or in the digital place. And this technique is actually not new, and this technique is called the zero knowledge proof. So if you are thinking along the line, if we are thinking we're changing our paradigm into protecting data, and then we're thinking about all the technologies, so zero knowledge proof may not even be the only technology that we can use to do that, but it is one of the more promising ones that we should explore more. So maybe I will stop there before we dive deeper into this. But so I would like to invite maybe Len and Isaac, who are already on stage.
Hi, Mariam. Yep,
Yeah,
here.
I invite you to share your thoughts on the conversation.
Yeah, so actually, there are a lot of questions or there are a lot of insights that I have in my mind, especially in this context of I am my data. Um, and I actually would like to invite like everyone in the room to also share these thoughts. One of the bigger things that bugs me is that I believe in it. I believe in the principle of I am my data. What I wanted to know is that how, if I am my data, then how am I able to keep track? So I think there are also like technologists in the room. Like, how am I able to keep track of the different means in the form of data in the internet? How am I able to kind of protect them? How will I know that I'm actually there and here and in different phases, and how big am I in the internet? Is there like a tool to that? I mean, because it freaks you out, right? If you, like what John said, if you connect it to your body, then that's probably my arm over there, and I'm totally unaware where my arm is. It's probably
Yeah,
doing things that I don't want it to do.
yeah,
It's kind of blowing your mind, and you need, there has to be some way of tracking the different me everywhere. Um, yeah, so I don't know how what John and Isa think about that. Or the rest of the people in the room. I really wanted to encourage everyone else, especially if you're a technologist or like a simple citizen in the internet. What your thoughts about these are, because you do exist, we do exist, I do exist in this space, and I exist in gazillion forms that I have no idea of. And I try to keep track of them. Sometimes I find myself like journaling because I'm really kind of, a paranoid freak. Sometimes so you kind of journal, but I don't understand it. Like, what's the nature of data? Does it die at some point? Do a part of me die without me burying it? I mean, do I have to bury it? So all of those things. So
I
maybe
mean,
John,
if you don't
I don't know
exist
what.
on the internet, do you even exist, kind of thing, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so
Sorry.
there is
I
an
don't
element.
have,
Sorry, Len, there's a lag. Sorry, go on.
no. I was just saying, John, that I don't intend to make to make it humorous, but I'm really having all of this. It's like overlapping in my head in many different ways. So yeah,
Yeah, so there is a consideration there to be had when it comes to when we look at the digital twin that is generated with the data, and it's possibly one of the reasons why it's so difficult so far to grasp and to try to put that in our heads, because until now data when it comes to those kind of profilings have been used in a very how to say passive way, but let's imagine for a moment what's going to happen. So let's explain a bit more what I meant about the passive way. So the passive way is you interact with a number of social media platforms, for instance, and they collect things, as I was mentioning before, such as your physical information, but also your activity information, and also the information inside the black box of your head. Fine. And the reason why they do this is because they basically want to sell services, or they want to do what you would understand as micro-segmenting, which is identifying micro groups of people on a specific interest, common interest, so that you can push that specific button and trigger that interest. Let's say I want to sell a vacuum cleaner with the shape of one dragon because you have people who are fans of Game of Thrones. And so you will be wanting to identify those specific people. And the cool thing, well, the scary thing, is that nowadays the product doesn't even need to exist anymore. As in, you can basically print it out in 3D specifically for the 5 people who are going to be buying it, only the moment that they buy it. And this, I can share later a video about that is kind of sort of terrific in a way. Now, that is very passive usage of that data. I'm having a certain amount, I have a rack of clothes, and I can decide which one to choose based on a number of circumstances and based on a number of criteria. The very one step beyond scary part is going to be the moment that we actually have, if this is not already happening and we just don't know about, that same information spun into an actual process in memory, and basically having a software that acts like us based on information that it knows about us. And so that type of situation where I can simulate the way I interact with a service, for instance, my bank, and have a piece of software that would be essentially indistinguishable from me, depending on the level of resolution that you have involved, of course. For those who may not know, for instance, there's something called the Turing test, and the Turing test, what it gives you is the challenge of communicating with something through a computer interface, and you do not know how to have a chat, for instance, and you do not know if the other side of the communication is a person or is a machine. And so the Turing test establishes that if you are not able to make the difference that it is not a human, if you cannot pinpoint exactly as a machine, it basically means that the machine is behaving in a enough human-like way to fool you. Any single machine that cannot be distinguished between a human in terms of interaction is what they call it has passed the Turing test. And the same goes for behavior. So if I have a piece of software that behaves exactly like I do, what's going to be the difference between me and that piece of software? You can't really make the difference. And the reason why I'm pointing out is because it has legal implications. Let's say, for instance, that I attempt hack bank, and I succeed, but I get caught. Well, as a person, I'm liable legally, and if someone can find enough evidence that I was the one trying to hack the bank and steal money from others, I'll go to jail. And there's a whole process, and there's a judge who's going to be paying attention to that. But now if I have a piece of software that behaves exactly like I do, who will leave exactly the same type of breadcrumbs as I would if I was the one doing it, and all that evidence is presented to the judge, how is the judge going to make the difference between whether it was me or whether a piece of software that was representing me? That's just not going to be possible at some point. And so it's not, it would be akin as, let's put it this way, it would be akin as me distributing all over the place my fingerprints so that someone can go commit a crime and leave my fingerprints all over the place so that it falls into me. If the degree of verification of the police is just fingerprints, I'm done. But even one step further, if it was also finding DNA, but if my DNA at some point would be accessible online and someone would actually clone a piece of hair of mine or 5 pieces of hair, drop them in the crime scene, put as well some of my fingerprints, and I'm also done. Because in the end, any case is going to be just as complete or as accurate as the level, as the degree of, let's say, sampling ratio that you're going to have. But what I mean by that is that it will depend on how much proof a judge will want to have in order to convict me. If they need five items of proof, the only thing that I need to do is manufacture those 5 items of proof, and that's it. I will be equal to my digital counterpart, and that's the problematic way. That there has to be systems for us moving forward to first understand the importance about the data that represents us, how easy it is to copy it, how easy it is to duplicate it, how easy it is to manipulate it, and then make sure that we always keep agency over that data, because otherwise we're going to be exposed to terrible things moving forward. There's no getting around it.
Thank you.
Um,
Oh,
I have
sorry.
a follow-up. Yeah, I have just a follow-up, John. So are you saying that, with all the data that we leave everywhere, someone could copy it and create an entity that is us or is you in the internet without you knowing, or with you knowing, or with your consent?
Without you knowing, and definitely they can. In fact, I'm surprised that no one has been testing that. I mean, I'm sure someone has tested it.
It,
It's just probably haven't gone into the public
it's
eye.
being tested. If I can come in here,
Yeah, sure, go on.
let me play the devil's advocate for a bit. When you say I am my data, me equals my data, me and my data are one. The flip side of that is basically what John was trying to explain to us a few minutes ago. When you make that distinction, it means that when you put together things like your biometrics that have been digitized, and now a digital format that somebody can copy and replicate using some DNA sequencer, some encoding DNA onto something else, and then maybe add that together with doctor CCTV footage using deep fakes, and then you're really done, because they'll be like, your fingerprints are here, you here on video. That's about it. And in that case, if you don't have some type of way to digitally sign that identity of yours that's out there, to have some kind of special signature that nobody else knows, then it's difficult. There has to be some way for us to be able to sign. So even when somebody or some machine tries to mimic our behavior or impersonate us, there should be a way for you to be able to digitally discern that, okay, it's actually not this person because the signatures don't match. But then that's another conversation. So when we are looking at these things, as we push for this, we should also look at the flip side, because that same data out there can be weaponized against you if the person or if group of people are motivated enough. I'll stop here for now.
All right. Thank you very much. One thing that I want to add is that is the fact that the reason why we need to gather here to talk about this is because currently there are very few, if any, legal legal foundations to protect these digital entities or our digital entities in uh, in in the digital space. So even if we do somehow come up with the technology to do this for us to protect our digital entities online, if they don't have legal standing, I suppose, that these entities can be harmed, that these entities can be infringed their rights upon, then it can be something that is harmful to the individual who is attached to that entity. So yeah, so that's one of the reasons why we go back to the same question. Can we be thinking about alternative ways of sharing data once we've accepted the fact that sharing data is no longer it's inevitable. We have to do it regardless of what. And but at the very least, we reduce the probability or we reduce the chances of being unknowingly hijacked to perform digital transactions that you don't even know that you're performing. So I would like to open up the, yep, Len, I see that you're on. But if anyone in the audience would like to to come on stage to discuss this with us, you're very much welcome to do so. Len, would you like to add?
No, I just wanted to say that this is actually one of the beauty and the the positive side of of this discussion. I mean earlier it sounded like all like there's this fear around all of that developing, but the reason why we're doing this, like what Lauren is saying, is that because there's no conversation elsewhere, and if there are few conversations, and if we don't start talking about it now, we don't basically want to be hijacked in the future. And I think that's one of the you know the beauty of these conversations that we're having. What I wanted to ask both Isaac and John and everyone else in the room is that so what do you do while that there's nothing yet formed? I mean, aside from joining discussions such as this one, sorry, this one. Aside from there are discussions such as this one, aside from that, what could you do to kind of you know um, protect yourself from without without the technology that Isaac is saying. Sorry. Yeah. What else could we do to protect ourselves from being not to jeopardize our data?
All right. If I can
Yep.
start with the response. First of all, we it's about education, educating ourselves to to start looking into start if you haven't already, you start looking into how do platforms process my data, and some of these things can be very very long documents, and they bury a lot of things in fine print and all of that. But I think it's high time we start to care enough to look. So educate ourselves on how these platforms process all of these things. We're having a conversation earlier, the opening doors um, networking session this morning with Paul. I think he dropped out for a bit, and Eric and Osaru. When we're talking, and we're just having this conversation about this black box. That okay, when okay, he was talking about signing into AirMate with his Google account, and he doesn't even know what was passed on from Google to AirMate, and if it was encrypted or not, if it was hashed or not, he doesn't know. All he knows is he just clicked, and then he was in the platform. So things like that, we need to start to ask questions like that when I'm signing into this, what is being passed on, and then on the technical side, there are certain solutions, experimental, and I don't think anything solid yet. We did hear about IRMA, IRMA, I review my attributes. It's actually an app that was on the App Store at some point. I'm not sure if it's still there. That's something I need to also double check. Um, so there are some solutions out there still in early stages. People trying to figure out ways to do things like these. There's Adam in the house. Adam works with data protocols, and we're actually having a conversation also during that session about things like that. So maybe if Adam, do you want to come on stage and share your perspective on this? I'm not sure if you're still here in person, but so things like that. You start to look into solutions of how do I protect myself. Start with passwords, for example. How many of us here have use the same password for more than one account? Start with things like that. Protect yourself as much as you can. There really isn't much you can do when it comes to platform itself because as I say again, it's a black box. We don't know. Look into local movements like ours. To try and see how you can support and raise a voice and all of that. On the technical side, for those who are technologists, wherever you can help out, we are pulling ideas from all angles to try and figure out a way to be able to come up with maybe certain mechanisms to share data that gives users control over what they share and how they share. I hope that helps.
I would say the technicals or the technicalities of how we're going to do that is an outcome of changing our view about our relationship to data. Oh, we have Adam now on stage. Where right now our relationship is the relationship of user and platform provider or owner. So we follow the rules of that have already been made by the platforms. But if we could imagine a more democratic or even a more bottom-up approach to using technology, then perhaps we could also imagine different ways of interacting with platforms or the technologies we use in order to reflect the values that we believe in. So we have Adam now on stage. Hi, Adam.
Sorry, one quick.
Hello, just getting used to this platform. Thanks.
Welcome, Adam. Sorry, one quick thing. I would also like to invite CY Tan is here. He's based in Malaysia, and I think you have an interesting perspective on this. Nicholas, also, please join us if you are here.
Yeah.
Thank you. Please carry.
Carry on, Adam.
So sorry, I didn't hear for a moment what you invited me on stage for.
We're talking about
Okay, so
solutions to how we share, or what gives us control, the users, over how we share our data. We don't know what is being shared. How do we deal with that? What do we do?
I think the problem is the stakeholders. It's in their interest that users. There's a difference between the people that are controlling everything and the user in giving the user that control. Like Jean was talking about LinkedIn and how it doesn't let you do certain things. Well, there's a reason for that, because it's in LinkedIn's interest to sort of push the user towards things that they want. So and GDPR and all that's been an effort to regulate that and just try and push organizations more in alignment with to actually enshrine that users and their data privacy rights, they're actually empowered to have them and act on them. And they even put in the regulations a sort of foresight that said, okay, we know big tech is going to make these changes to adjust to these regulations. So what else can we do? Can we put in a 4% fine to really make sure it's significant enough for them to respond? And I think the results have been less than spectacular. So talking to some people here, one idea is just to have people leave the big tech platforms and have our own platforms and our own environment. And I think that sort of revolution comes from users realizing that each user adds value to each of those platforms. Like the literal valuation of those platforms is the number of millions of users there. And so if those users can be convinced, and in my estimations, about 26% of people are what I call privacy pioneers. They're actually interested in privacy. They're willing to make changes. They're willing to put in some effort. So about a quarter of the population is up for that and growing. So if the platforms don't change enough, and I think that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to do what I would call grey hat privacy. They're trying to accommodate users and the zeitgeist enough that they don't leave the platform, but they're not doing best practices, what I call white hat privacy. And that's what the 25% of people want, and especially the people here, which is why I'm happy to join. So that'd be my initial response.
thank you, Adam. Okay, we still have uh, another hour, almost another hour, 50 minutes to the discussion. We could go back to some of the concepts that were mentioned before, and how would these have real world consequences or real world applications. Um, so when it comes to protecting our digital selves, let me show the slide I'm showing. This. So we came up with a model that represents what we could be doing thinking big, looking at the big picture. What do we mean by protecting ourselves online? Is to look at ourselves as digital citizens rather than just digital users, and looking at those representations of ourselves in the digital space as having rights on their own. So we have rules in real life that would govern the way that we behave, so that we could stay peaceful and stay harmonious with each other. And those kind of rules and regulations are enacted by governments and international organizations and other stakeholders in order to sort of give a baseline principle on how we should behave in the real world. Now, these type of behavior, these type of guidelines, or these type of principles are defined by universal values, universal standards of ethics and morality. We call them as basic fundamental human rights, and so the digital version of it would be the digital rights. Who that would be threatened, or that would be that would come into conflict, perhaps, if we don't have those kind of laws to protect us to begin with. So as Adam mentioned just now, if we don't even realize that we need to protect our data, and it is actually in the interest of companies perhaps to not to have us not demand for such things, then the type of digital world that we're going to be immersed in is going to be a kind of digital world that does not fully respect our human rights as translated into the digital space. So when deciding what kind of technologies to use, when deciding what kind of systems that we are going to design, these are the things that you start with. You don't start with the technology. You start with thinking about the citizens that you have in mind. You know, as a citizen, as a someone who has the power to govern those citizens, do you believe in the right to freedom of expression? Do you believe in the right to privacy? Do you believe in, as a society, do we believe in freedom of speech? And so technology, when given to democratic inclined digital governments or any type of authority, the platforms that we see are, we can see them as the digital governments of us, the digital citizens. Then they would implement policies, then they would implement technology features that would actually reflect that value. So this is we've gone into like a rather conceptual and philosophical discussion on how to build technology, but that is precisely where we need to go. Because if technology was given to an authoritarian government, then they're going to use technology in order to surveil us even more and more, and would not be open to the idea that our data, the rights to our data, should be given to us and not to them. In this sense, the power that is concentrated to the authorities in this kind of relationship would be preserved in order to serve the political interests of people in power. Does anybody else have something to add to that?
I think you're right there about the alignment, and that's something that the GDPR was trying to do. Was and one argument we've used with businesses to encourage them is to say, well, there's these reports that show that if you market yourself as privacy friendly, you're going to get those privacy pioneers to come on board. So that's one way to influence them and get better alignment. Using the profit motive, but there's always going to be that gap.
Thanks, Adam. John, I see you have come. Yep.
Yeah, so one of the things that always strikes me when it comes to look into these conversations, and to me it's been one of the problems that we had in tackling with them, is that we always looked at them, as you were mentioning, from maybe not a philosophical perspective, more for a legal policy type of oriented perspective. And when it comes to the implementation is never going to be policy based, it's going to be technically based. It's as if you were to tell me that there's a urban regulation as to how to build public buildings, and the bricks are just going to compose themselves magically just because there's a piece of paper that says buildings need to be safe. That's not the case. There's actually a technical standard on how to make those buildings safe that will tell you exactly the type of concrete you're going to be putting together, the type of torsion that concrete needs to be applied into, and the type of the way it's going to be built, the way it's going to be put together, how you're going to be treating even the transport of that concrete matters. And I mean, I'm just using concrete as among the thousands of details that you need to have. And that's because they actually have two things. One, a technical standard for implementation, and the technical standard for implementation exists because there's a taxonomy that they can describe what are the needs from an implementation perspective. Now, when it comes to technology, we are essentially lacking of that taxonomy. If you think about what another example would be two doctors. So two doctors can talk to each other, and they can decide the course of action they're going to have to fulfill their primary goal, which is to save patients. And they can philosophically discuss about, we care about life and therefore we want to save patients. That's the philosophical objective. Now, how you get there from a technical perspective is, well, there's going to be a medication, there's going to be a diagnosis, there's going to be a way that I need in order to be able to name and identify whatever problem the patient is having, and I need to have the language to describe that. So, we can talk about having the flu because there's a name for the flu, and we can talk about having cancer because there's a name for cancer, and I can talk about chemotherapy because it has a name on it. And so two doctors can decide what's going to be the best alternative chemotherapy among the different options they're going to have in the market according to the type of cancer, which they can define. And they have taxonomies for all of those things. And so they can proceed into discussing between the two of them what's going to be the course of action, because they can specifically put names into it. Now, when it comes to technologies, they just cannot do that because we don't have a taxonomy for digital harms. Everything that we'll be trying to do so far is, we want freedom of expression and we want freedom of movement. Fine, that is the objective that you want to reach into it. But what is going to be the technical way to implement that? Good luck with it. There is no such thing as the moment. That's one of the things that TIF has been working on. And so in that particular diagram, when you look at the digital harms and digital rights, what really those means is the taxonomy that you need to be able to have two technical people discussing about one specific outcome that they are trying to avoid in as much as possible, if ever possible, from a proactive perspective. It's really a matter of language, and I'm not talking about just I'm talking about the technical language that needs to be behind it, the taxonomy for those definitions, not just what you would understand as linguistic language. It has to do with the way that's going to be transcribed into code. And it's the only way you're going to have two technologies knowing exactly what they are supposed to be working on. Something that you cannot put into an algorithm cannot be coded. And in order to put it into an algorithm, you need to understand how that pieces into different elements that interconnect so that they can have sense and they have a flow. There isn't that much of a possible flow to describe things such as freedom of expression, because it's a very intangible, qualitative type of term, and we're trying to push it with a shoehorn into a quantitative state. That's not going to happen anytime soon.
Okay. now that we've gone into the more technical side of things, I mentioned an example of a technology earlier, zero knowledge proof. It was um, something that was introduced to me by John, actually, to illustrate an example of how we can technologically solve the problem of not wanting to reveal more than we need. And one of the applications of that is in an election or in an electronic election, for example, to verify our identity without revealing too much. And the example always given here is that we need, when you come to the polling station, you don't actually need to reveal your age. You just need to verify that you are above 21 years of age and you are able to vote. So these kind of these kind of solutions that come out of it is coming from the fact that we already know what we want, the kind of digital world that we want to live in, or the kind of digital world that we need to live in order to better protect ourselves, not just in the digital space, but also in the human space in order to, fully realize our human rights. And are there any other technologies that you could think of here, John, or if you've heard before, or maybe also perhaps Isaac, that maybe we could look into, something similar to this? Isaac mentioned IRMA earlier, and maybe you could elaborate a little bit more on that, Isaac.
You hear me?
Isaac, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, okay, we can hear you now.
All right. I mean, for IRMA, it's I reveal my attributes. That's what IRMA means, and it's built on a technology, as Mariam was trying to explain, that basically um, the way it works is, if you go to, she was making an example with the polling booth, for example, it just needs to verify that you are above, or you are the age, voting age. It doesn't really need to share how old you are, or like share your date of birth and all of that info, or where you live and all of that. It just needs to be able to verify. Now, things like that, I'm not an expert. I just understand how it works, and those are the basics of it. I'm trying to do a search now on that. Let me see if I can find it. I'll just paste it here. And I don't know, is anybody here who wants to? John, have you done any? Have you looked into that in recent times?
Come again, I couldn't hear you on the question.
Sorry, I was asking if you've looked into IRMA recently.
No, I haven't. I haven't updated myself into it. I just put the link on the chat for people to check on it. I believe Professor Jacobs is still working on it.
Yeah. All right, thank you. So yeah, that pretty much wraps it up. There isn't.
Yeah.
We just need to something we're still looking into ourselves. But yeah.
I would answer one of the questions, if I'm not wrong. Len asked another question. We'll get back into the question that you asked there, Len. But you were, because this is a segue or a follow up to what Mariam was mentioning about how to reduce digital footprint shadows. What would be the technologies, as you were asking before, Mariam? And I just had a very interesting conversation this week with someone who was pointing out to. I didn't put on my camera. Who was pointing out to a good argument that I would like to explore, in which for him the single-handedly most effective action at the moment would be to push for data minimization at any given time. And he had some very, I mean, aside from the obvious, yeah, sure, that's definitely a very good approach. Aside from I still want to keep this question on the screen. he made some very compelling arguments that I'm hoping he's going to actually present into TechUp in the coming days. That's why I don't want to reveal too much about it. But he was really making some good argument as to why just the fact that there would be an intentional and proactive thinking to minimize the amount of data that is used in every single transaction to the bare minimum that is required for the motive of the transaction would be the single most effective way to minimize harms. I still need to translate that into. I need to think more deeply into that, specifically because of the consequences when it comes to how you're going to be defining the schemas for that. So let me put it this way. When you think about a person, there's a number of automatic thoughts that are conforming that person in your head. So I'm thinking about, say, Isaac or Mariam or Len or Adam. And I already have a model of what a person is. So you have two arms, 2 legs, a head, 2 eyes, a mouth. And it's very easy for me to portray or to create a generated image in my head about what a person may look like, at least the one that you draw on a piece of paper with a very simple type of drawing, like a kid kind of thing. And that's what you would call a schema. So you can define what are the features, the characteristics of a human in a number of lists of features. And when it comes to data, that's exactly what you do. You put together all of those things, and so you would have a bunch of data that represents a car. So how many wheels does the car have? How many doors? What's the color? The type of brakes that it has? How many seat belts? How many airbags? How many seats the people can sit in? The capacity of the trunk, etc. The power of the motor. All of that defines and models that particular car. Now, when you want to make an interaction between a car, let's say, in a repair shop, how many of those features are required for the repair shop to be able to do the repair that it requires? Does it require to have the full information of the car with the whole history of everything that has been done into the car? Or just the specific of the problem that the car is experiencing right at that point for the repair? So for instance, does the color of the car have any influence on whether the engine is functioning or not? Probably not. Does the amount of wheels also depend or make any difference as to whether the engine is properly combustion engine? Is it properly doing the mix between the gasoline and the air? Probably not, neither. And so when you do an interaction between a person and a platform, all the extra information that is not required for that particular interaction, for the particulars of the objective of the interaction, should be removed from the equation and never being transmitted to the platform to begin with. So that it makes a lot of sense. And I would say that data minimization, I have a tendency to agree that it's possibly the simplest handedly. I mean, it's up there. I don't want to say I wouldn't tell you that it's the most one, but possibly top 5 or top 3. It definitely makes it probably all the way there. Yeah. And it reduces the digital footprint and shadow, because the least information that is not necessary that you share with others, the less they learn more about you, and the less they learn about those footprints and shadows that were unnecessary to begin with.
Could I make a follow-up to that, Maya? Okay. Make a follow-up to John.
Yes, definitely. Okay.
So are you saying that it makes some sense? You call it digital minimization? Okay. Data minimization. Sorry, it's a tongue twister to me. Yeah, but you learn something new every day. Yeah, so are you suggesting that in some way that kind of makes sense, at this time, to be mindful of not only what you share in the internet, I mean in social media, but what Is it like what sites you visit, what what online profiles you have? Is that what you're kind of saying? That it makes sense to do that?
Yeah, pretty much. So the data minimization is one of the um, it's part of the GDPR as it was defined.
Uh huh.
From the article that I'm providing there is 1.c, although it's just not, they don't make the definition. It's just the reference to the concept itself, and they define it as adequate, relevant, and limited to what is necessary in relation to the purposes for which they are processed. So again, getting the example of Marian with the voting.
Mm-hmm.
I do not require to know. So you go to the voting table. Len, could you yeah, mute yourself? Yes, I think there was some feedback there. So if you go to the voting table, and they need to require to verify your identity, essentially to know if you are eligible to vote in that particular district. Normally, what happens is you provide your IC, and your IC, that piece of paper, that piece of plastic, typically has way more information than what they require. And so when you do that, you are showing and sharing information that is beyond the actual need for the verification. They would normally need to have your name and your IC number so that they verify the list to see if you are subscribed to that particular circumscription or district. And based on that, if you make the list, let's listen to it. But in places such as Malaysia, for instance, what you also have is your religion, where you were born, but also your address, and so forth and so forth. Those are data that are not necessarily for you being eligible to vote. You already have been elected there. I would even say that, for instance, in the case of Malaysian IC, one of the problems is it's encoded with part of that information. If I'm not wrong, Marian can correct me here, but I believe it states the state where you were born, your gender, and the
Your
year.
religion,
Come again, Marian?
your address, your home address, your religion,
Yeah,
And
so
date of
those
birth.
are written,
and your
and date of birth.
marital status.
And so there is no real need why you would be revealing that to the person who's verifying your identity. The only thing that they require is your name and your IC number. I know the story. That would be a case of data minimization.
You're talking about for voting, right, Juan?
Yes, in this
Voting. Yeah, I think we've jumped into another rabbit hole. Because
Yeah.
is Malaysia using your IC to vote? Does it serve as your voting ID, or do you have a separate ID for voting?
Yeah, so we've been talking about data that we have control over in terms of giving away our personal information. I mean, regardless of the context, the fact that we actually, the kind of information we reveal or over reveal coming from us. But also, on the other hand, we have all these new developments in IoT technologies to 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 basically track people wherever they are, and having all these devices around you that you have no control over tracking you. And it's only a matter of time before having somebody interested enough in your whereabouts or interested enough in your affairs to be able to get those kind of information and use it for whatever purposes that they deem right. So if there is no law that says this is not allowed, okay, basically getting these kind of things from the public, or using it for your own personal whatever purpose, right, without the consent of the person that you're doing it to, then there is no legal basis to ask for like accountability when you have been harmed. like that. It is essentially a violation of your right to privacy and a violation of your right to not be surveilled. Yeah, so what is more, I mean, yeah, we worry, we talk about our own worry about the data that we come, that comes from us. But what about also data that are taken about us that are not taken for us by sensors around us? So I know I'm pretty much going around in circles, but I think you get the gist, right? Um, Hello.
Yes, yes, yeah, yeah. Sorry, I just wanted to like patch this question up. So John's responding to it that data minimization would be kind of a solution. I just have one like super follow-up question to that, super final. Is that the data minimization response, is that from the providers, from the government, or is it like a proactive action from the user or the, I mean, like me, the
Oh yeah,
citizen?
okay. Now I remember why I brought that up. It's because of that. How do you then do data minimization
Well,
if everything around you is collecting your data? So
because it has to be the service providers and the software designers that minimize that request for data. So you design a service for a specific objective, let's say shopping online. And the objective is I'm going to be able to buy cookies online to online supermarket. Based on that need, what you need to analyze is what's going to be the least amount of information that is required from the customer in order for me to deliver the service, which is to send the bloody cookies to their home. Do I need their personal, educational degree or the latest place they've been partying on, the GPS location of it? No, I don't. The basic thing that I need is to be able to identify the recipient and the address for the delivery and the time at which the delivery has to happen, and that's about it. So the amount of data that has to be collected will always be determined by the architect of the specific application, and normally you will have policies that will be encouraging those architects to minimize the data set. The case of GDPR is one of the elements of the regulation. But aside from that, the universe does not imply or does not have any universal law that obliges into data minimization. It has to be a decision that is taken by the parties, and in this case, users more often than not, they don't have any say into it. So you could try to minimize some data when you're given the option, such as, for instance, the terrible cookies. When you receive a notification, do you want to accept cookies? And then you have to go through whether you're going to be using the critical ones, the ones that are required for the platform to function, and other than are, for instance, for advertising. Well, you could say, no, I don't want to accept the cookies that have to do with advertising. And then you are minimizing data on your side. But again, that is only offered because the application allows you to make that decision. So in the end, it really has to do with what the software developer has put into your hands, and all the management of those decisions are in their hands. Literally, almost never in the actual hands of the final user. There's one element that I wanted to follow up on what you were mentioning before, Marianne, and that segues very well into the concept of IRMA data, which is the part of the consent. You were just mentioning about it a couple of minutes ago, and it's something that has always been very, I want to say curious, but it kind of how to say, it's so obvious that I can't even begin to imagine why there's a conversation about it. I mean, I don't understand why there are doubts about that concept. If we accept the fact that we need to give consent to the use of our data, and that seems to be very well accepted and understood by almost everybody, except those who, of course, want to take your data without your consent. That's another story. Then what am I consenting on? I mean, I can only consent to provide you access to my car if it is my car. If it's not my car, how can I give you consent to give you the car of a friend of mine? You know, unless that friend has given me the keys and I'm holding the car, but while they are on holidays, and I'm giving the permission to release the car to a third person, unless I'm doing that, and in the circumstance, there's no way where I can actually give you access to a third-party car. I have to have a certain degree of ownership on anything that I consent upon. And if it's not ownership, at least delegation of ownership or delegation of management. One of those, you know, it's a spectrum, but you know, it has to fall into that. If I have access whatsoever, I cannot consent and I cannot give you access. I mean, if I want to break the law, then definitely I can. But we're talking about lawful latitudes here. And so how come can I give access to data that doesn't belong to me? So the advocates of those who say, no, you shouldn't be owning your data. Well, I have to own my data if I want to consent on it. You can't square that circle otherwise. And the segue or the problem that they always look at is, oh, because if you own your data, you're going to be able to make business out of it. Well, no. I mean, I own my liver and my kidneys and my heart. Doesn't mean I can sell it. I can give it away if I'm dead because I want to donate my organs, but I can't just go around and sell it. There are laws against it. And so if we perceive that a specific selling methodology can create harm, it becomes illegal. And so, you know, it's two different steps of the equation. Is first, I have to own the data, and then what can I do with that ownership? If the law would prohibit me from selling some of my data or all of the data for that matter, then it would actually be part of the technology design. The moment that we accept the concept of consent, I can't get my head around how could you make it so different as to accept consent and not accept that you are your data. It just doesn't compute in my head.
Yep. The two extremes when we talk about data ownership is either you fully own your data or you don't own your data at all. But I guess what we should be thinking more about is that, you know, we do, in fact, everybody does own their own data. And then how do we transfer the kind of power that we have or the kind of control that we have over that data from the current data ownership regime to a more progressive data ownership regime or system? Because right now, what we are problematizing is the fact that the data ownership regime posits that the only authority is people who owns the platform or the people who design the technology, and we're just users who are just using it. And so it's a passive kind of relationship. It's very, very one-sided. And this one-sidedness has real world implications in the fact that it creates knowledge or information asymmetry, whereby there is very few people having a whole bunch of knowledge. A lot of this knowledge is not it's under the control of few people, and not also at the control of the people who are producing that data, producing that knowledge. And so because of that, then there's going to be a power relation here that is not balanced, or that is not given back or to the people who matter, who actually make the platform, you know, profitable. So I wanted to just draw back to the data minimization thing because I feel like it's more like a distraction. You know, it's a method. Yeah, it's a method, but it distracts from the real issue, which is actually data ownership. We have to take back our ownership of our own data in order for us to have more control over where they go and what they're being used for. And before we can do that, we have to know why we are even producing that data in the first place, how the data is being collected, and who has access to them, who has control over them, and what are the kinds of safety mechanism or accountability mechanisms that we could that we could pursue in case something happens to them that we don't want to happen. Um, yeah. So anyone else who would like to add more to what we're talking about?
Just
Adam.
I agree with what you're saying there, but yeah, you're right. When you're leaving it up to governments, which are influenced very heavily by lobbyists from the big tech companies, there's still a lot to do. But at least the good sign is that the big tech companies want to operate within the law, so they are limited. So the other interesting approach I've seen is a technological approach to solving this. They can't do anything with your personal data if they don't actually have it. So some of the ideas that have been worked on is like having a black box that has all your personal data in it, that's encrypted, and the platform doesn't actually get to hold your data. It just gets to query, make legitimate queries about it. Is this person a male, and things like that. I mean, there's not an ideal solution, but it means they don't just get a copy of your data and can secretly do.
Was it my connection, or did Adam?
Yeah,
Drop?
Adam dropped.
Oh, okay. All right. Sorry. Hi, Adam. Could you repeat your last?
That didn't come through.
Yeah,
so
you dropped off a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, I said the other approach to solving this problem is a technological approach, where if you don't give the company your data, personal data, then they can't do anything with it. So one solution was a black box where your personal data sits encrypted, and the only interaction the platform has is in a completely logged way on a blockchain, where they query the database as to, I have this justifiable reason to know whether this person's male. And then I say, yes, I give you consent to know that. And then they go away and do that. So solutions like that, I mean, they're not perfect. And you could guard against the platform, asking enough questions to get all the information about you. And another one I read about recently was using Ethereum as a global log-on ID, so we don't need to log on with OAuth and use Google to sign on to yet another service. This Ethereum ID would be used everywhere globally, which might help take away some of that power you were talking about, Mary.
Thank you for sharing that, Adam, and adding on to the examples of real-world applications of what we're talking about. There is a question here from Ivy Fung. When we are able to control our data, do we really know how to use them? I would say that this is not the right question. This is not the kind of question that we should be asking, because whether or not we know how to use our data, that's not, it doesn't affect the fact that we should still have control over them. Regardless of whether or not we use them, that's not what's being questioned here. Because if we don't even have control over it in the first place, then, or access over it in the first place, then how are we gonna even find out if we have uses for them? And it's just, to me, that we should be focusing our queries or our responsibility not towards how we are going to use our data, but towards, the responsibility should be heavier on the platform or the service provider side to justify to us, why do you need our data? So putting the power back to us, rather than leaving that amount of power to people who collect our data about us in order to affect our behavior. Rather than doing that, we should be doing more of claiming back that power into our hands and asking them why they need our data, in the first place. You see, um, but maybe someone else on stage would like to chime in on that as well.
Well, there is an element about the question of Ivy that speaks of simplification. So one of the reasons why people get so overwhelmed about their data is because there's a lot of it, because it's not always easy to understand it. And as Ivy was pointing, even if I know that something exists, do I really know how to use it? You know, I buy a car and possibly we only use about 20 to 25% of the actual gadgets and capacities. Now the thing is, I mean, how many times you really use everything that the car provides you? It's very, I mean, not really often. I mean, not to mention, for instance, a laptop. You have laptops with you with plenty of software and things that you can do. You barely use 50% of the capacities that really does, and so goes for smartphones and pretty much anything. Now, the idea here is that overwhelming of control of data is very likely to be on top of the list of reasons why people don't care anymore, because it's just too much. People just have too many things to take care of on a daily basis, and if on top of that they need to understand and control and make sure that every single piece of data of theirs is used properly, well, that's problematic. And it's, I mean, think about it from the terms and conditions or terms of use of big social media platforms. It's not that you can't read the document, it's that they're boring to read. It's just too many pages. And so you just give up because the degree of complexity to approach that particular task just makes it ridiculous for you to think, you know, I don't want to spend 2 hours of my life just reading this crap. And the same goes for the use of my data. I don't want to be understanding every single interaction, everything that I do, whether it is going to be compliant or not, etc., etc. I mean, you just give up. And so what technology should really start going into is two elements, and I think one of them has been understood by big tech, and that's why they're trying to position themselves there. The first one would be, if you have a setting of behavior that you want repeated across time and across devices, it should also be an actual setting in your devices. What do I mean by that? Well, when I share my data with you, for instance, Mariam, let's say you're a bank, and part of the options in the contract says that you're asking me for permission to share with a third party, so to share it with Len. Maybe I'm okay with you using my data, but I'm not okay with you sharing with a third party. And that's a personal decision of mine, not specific to your case, but in general. I don't want to be interacting with providers that request me to go for third-party sharing. Why is it that I have to be looking into the small print every single time I sign a contract with you? That should be a preference of mine that is applied blanket-wise. So it should be a setting on my phone, let's say, for instance, where I said I don't want to be interacting with any service and any app that is expecting to extract my data and share it with third parties. And that should be applied as a filter every time that I go, let's say, to my App Store, Android, Google Play, or the Apple App Store. That filter should be applied transparently for me, because it is a preference of mine. And so when you start scaling that into, you know, all the possible things that you could be doing, that's when you need assistance. So what is a personal assistant for someone who's managing a business, for instance? Is someone who's going to be taking care of the nitty-gritty details so that you can concentrate on what you need to do, which is managing the organization. That's what a personal assistant is. They are basically helping you with those nitty-gritty details. What's Siri? What's Cortana? What's Alexa? Personal assistants. What do? They provide you with very quick access to nitty-gritty details, nitty-gritty information, because it's convenient. And so what really happens here is that as we move into complexity, those assistants should be the ones isolating you from those problems based on the experience and the knowledge that you have. I mean, your personal assistant, the first day that you hire them, they know very little about you. After 6 months of interacting with you and see how you've been dealing with providers and dealing with customers, etc., etc. And how do you like to do things? They learn how to tweak those behaviors and making sure that, after lunch, they never book any single meeting because you require 30 minutes of having a rest. That's your personal behavior that is learned over time by your personal assistant. And so does your digital assistant. They learn the kind of information that you like, they learn the kind of behavior that you like, etc., 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 etc. And as time goes by, if they would observe that you never accept for third-party sharing, they should preemptively make sure that no such case is presented to you anymore, because you're going to say no anyway, so it's a waste of time. And so the problem that I see here is that we are essentially letting those personal assistants to be more and more commercial oriented. We are basically allowing the official digital spokesperson of Apple to be sitting with us at home. And that's going to be problematic, because they will not necessarily want to adapt and learn about your preferences, but instead keep pushing for their preferences upon you. I made a lightning talk on RightsCon a couple of years ago about this as emotional firewalls, because what essentially a personal assistant is exposed to is to learning exactly the emotional buttons that you need to press in order to obtain a reaction. I mean, a personal assistant, if properly trained and has observed the person that they're helping, they know exactly how to trigger their emotions by making them happy or making them sad or making them furious. And so, you have a lot of control into people once you learn those behaviors, and that's exactly what those digital personal assistants are doing. So, answering my side of the answer to Ivy is, we don't really know, and to a certain degree, you shouldn't have to be bothered about it. Technologists and the people who build the platform should be taking care of that and making sure that it's easy for you to make those decisions, and that you only have to do it once and not repeatedly every single bloody time.
Yeah, I was. I forgot that point actually. The fact that we shouldn't, as users, we shouldn't be bothered to check whether or not they observe our human rights, or to data protection and things like that. But we should just know that they do, that they actually work and they are actually designed to protect us. So just a reminder, we have 4 minutes left to the discussion, and perhaps we could come to a close. But before we do that, I would like to invite Len, Isaac, and perhaps even Adams for some concluding statements based on what we've discussed today. Or would you like to also respond to Ivy's question?
No, I think it was really comprehensive what Ron and the rest of us here have shared. I just wanted to, as a closing statement, I just wanted to encourage everyone to keep joining us in these conversations as we kind of navigate and figure out how we're going to move forward towards a society that's increasingly digital, and how we'll be able to, cope with that. I think these are developing beyond our own capacity and speed, and there's more need to be more connected now, with all of these changes happening into our lives because of because of this technology, the internet or the digital space. So yeah, that's all I could say. And this was a very interesting discussion, and I've learned a lot. I was also able to share some of the things that I know that we vibe in the IO Foundation. I think this is what's needed, a continued discussion to move forward together. Thank you, Mariam. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Isaac.
To tie everything up, and I feel like maybe this is something that people should take away with with IRMA, for example. As I said, for control, for it to take back control, you need something like that. There aren't many solutions out there. Just check it out. What it basically does is you save certain information on your phone. It's not on the cloud. It's actually on your physical device, and then you choose who you share, what platform you share that information with, and how. So maybe check it out. But those are the kind of things we want to see. So for the tech people here, maybe let's look into solutions on how to build more stuff like that that are, more compatible with systems we use every day. Because one of the limitations with IRMA is that there are in many places where you can actually use that. Other platforms need to be compatible in such a way with that for it to work. And that's a discussion for a different day. But things like that is what we want to see. And that's it from me for today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Perhaps the last closing statement from me would be to reiterate the point that we do need to re-look at the way that we view our relationship to our data, and because that would determine how we behave uh, within the digital space via all these technologies, these wonderful technologies that we are using on the everyday. Technology is a gateway. It is a portal. You go into yourself, and then your digital representations start representing you in those kind of spaces, and they are worth protecting in on its own right. So with that, I would like to just conclude today's session on at BitChat. We will have routine sessions like this on the same day at the same time at the monthly TechUp in September. Hope we will be announcing the topic and the title on our social media platforms, so you can find out more and be updated on our activities on our website, social media, such as LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook. Thank you very much, everybody. See you again soon. Thanks.